Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the informational call. This is on the EIM Resource Sufficiency Evaluation White Paper that was posted last week, September 19th, on the Miscellaneous Stakeholders Meetings page. This topic was previously discussed at the April 30th and July 19th EIM Offer Rules Stakeholder Workshops, and this white paper discusses improvements to the real-time resource efficiency test and also addresses the outstanding stakeholder comments that we received in those workshops. We are recording this call and we will make it available on the miscellaneous stakeholders page under that group. Look for that in the next couple days. This is informational only. We're not taking any written comments. However, we will respond to your questions during the call. We'll be breaking it at certain points and open it up for questions. So joining me in the room, I have Don Trethaway and Megan Pogue from our policy team and also John Anders from legal. And with that, I guess I'll just turn it over to Megan.
Yes, thanks, Christina. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our informational call today. We can move on to slide number 2. As Christina mentioned, this call is to discuss a white paper that was posted last week, and the paper proposed resource efficiency evaluation improvements into response to comments and discussions that we had at the last 2 EIM Offer Rules workshops. As Christina mentioned, those workshops were held on April 30th and July 19th and discussed 2 topics. The first is covered in this presentation, the EIM Resource Efficiency Evaluation, the second being the EIM mitigation and default energy bid options. I will note the EIM mitigation topic is being addressed as a separate new initiative and is not going to be discussed in this presentation today. We have identified that there are some resource efficiency evaluation improvements that we are able to implement without changes to our tariff and therefore can implement through the BPM change process, which can occur relatively quickly. So with that, we will go on to each of the items, and after each item, I'll stop for questions. The first item is the 15-minute freezing for flexible ramping test failures. We've identified that we can implement this enhancement through the BPM change process before the end of the 2018 calendar year. Currently, the flexible ramping test evaluates ramp intervals from the last 15-minute interval of the preceding operating hour to each 15-minute interval of the current operating hour. If any test is failed for any of the 4 intervals within the hour, then EIM transfers are limited to the entire hour. Based on stakeholder feedback, the ISO is proposing to evaluate each ramp individually. The 15-minute ramp test will test from T-minus 7.5 to T plus 7.5. The 30-minute ramp tests from T-minus 7.5 to T plus 22.5. The 45-minute ramp tests from T-minus 7.5 to T plus 37.5. And the 60-minute ramp will test T-minus 7.5 to T plus 52.5. So if a ramp test is failed, the EIM transfers will be limited to the previous 15-minute interval schedule just for that corresponding interval as opposed to the entire hour. Are there any questions on this enhancement?
So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand by pressing #2, and please identify yourself first. So Kyle, if you'll let me know when somebody's entered the queue, that'd be great.
We do have one person in the queue. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hi, good afternoon. It's Mark Pullman with PowerX.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, just had some questions. When I saw the white paper come out and I saw the slides, I guess I'm just struggling a little bit with a failure that occurs because an EIM entity or the CAISO BA doesn't have enough flexibility versus it doesn't have enough capacity. And so I can understand freezing the transfers for just one 15-minute interval at a time if you're failing for flexibility. But I think the problem I'm struggling with, and maybe I'm missing something here, is if an entity doesn't have enough capacity and you only freeze the transfers for one 15-minute interval, aren't you going to ramp up imports prior to them failing for capacity and then freeze them and use those imports to solve the capacity deficit? Like one of the comments we had back when this topic was being discussed was that freezing one interval at a time needed first to separate the capacity from the flexibility test as it relates to intra-hour capacity and flexibility evaluation. So I'm just trying to envision how this works, and if you bear with me for a moment, let's say we're heading into the evening peak hour.
Mark, I think you're missing one of the key elements is that we still have the capacity test. It's still an hourly test, and so to the extent that you fail don't have sufficient capacity, then you would be frozen for the entire hour at the previous last hour's 15-minute fourth interval schedule. So we haven't changed the capacity test. That we wouldn't do until you moved into 15-minute base schedules.
Right, but the capacity test is based on an hourly capacity check. What the flexible ramping sufficiency test does right now from a capacity perspective is it helps protect against leaning to meet the capacity, let's say late in the hour in the peak hour, as loads climbing rapidly or net load is climbing rapidly. The capacity test doesn't address that inside the hour. Again, I don't want our comments to be misunderstood. I understand freezing for one 15-minute interval at a time for a flexibility shortfall, but I still see that, unless I'm missing something here, that if you look at, say, an hour 19, or let's say the CAISO BA has a 45,000 megawatt load for the forecast, but it's rising to 46 by the end of the hour, you may have enough resources to meet 45,000, so you pass. But then as that load climbs in the hour, you're going to increase your imports as prices rise each interval. And then if you only fail from not having enough capacity in the last interval, those transfers are now going to be frozen at a higher level, and those transfers are going to be used to solve the capacity issue. So again, it's not that we oppose limiting the application of the measures to one interval for flexibility. It just seems like you're going to ramp up imports and then freeze at that higher level of ramped up imports and then use those imports to solve the intra-hour capacity needs. So just struggling with how to do this without creating a new gap on the capacity side.
So Mark, I'll try again. We will still do the capacity test, which ensures, prior to the operating hour, which ensures that they have sufficient resources to meet all 15-minute intervals from a capacity standpoint. And if you fail that test, you're out for the entire hour. The only thing that we're addressing is the flexibility, which is the 4 ramp tests, that where the current rule is if you fail one of the 4 ramp tests, you're out. What we're just saying now is if you fail one, it's only that 15-minute interval that you're out. So I think we're doing exactly what you're asking for.
Okay, we can take it offline. I'd like to understand how the hourly capacity test is picking up that last interval's capacity requirements in a ramp-up hour. Just would like maybe take it offline, understand that better in terms of, because I understand the capacity test to be an hourly test and the flexible ramping sufficiency test is picking up the intra-hour capacity and flexibility. And so the freezing wouldn't really work for that, but we can take it offline if you want to move forward.
Okay.
Any other questions, Kyle?
Yes, moving to our next question. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hey, Ramon Mitchell from Pacific Corp here. So when you limit the transfers to the previous 15-minute interval schedule, when we fail at T40, will you wait until the bind-in for the relevant interval, or will you freeze the advisories? How will that structure work?
So we would wait until the binding.
Okay, thank you.
Just like what we do with the current hourly failure, where you freeze it at the binding run of the 4th interval from the previous hour.
Right. Just that there can be a lot of lag time. If I know that I'm going to be frozen in the 4th interval, I have quite a lot of time to adjust my system to reach, you call it an optimal freeze point, but that's just a thought I had. Ignore me.
Okay.
Any other questions, Kyle?
Moving to our last question. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hello, this is Mariana Meza at BPA. I just have a general question about the capacity test. I'd like to know if the test applies to all EIM entities or only to those that use the CAISO load forecast.
Applies to all.
Okay. So if someone uses their own load forecast, the capacity test will still use the CAISO load forecast?
Correct. Yeah, because basically, it's the balance test that where it matters whether or not you're using your own load forecast or not to balance. Then you're not. Then you would, if you're using, there's different rules if you use your own forecast. With regards to the capacity test, the ramp test, those are all the same regardless of what load forecast you're using from a settlements purpose.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That was the last one, Kyle?
Yes, there are no more questions in the queue.
Okay.
All right, up next is the introduction of a 1% tolerance band. We did discuss this at the July 19th workshop. It was brought up that some entities are not passing or meeting the flexible ramping requirement and therefore not passing the flexible ramping test by an inconsequential megawatt amount. For example, not passing by a half of a megawatt. And the case was brought up that when this occurs, there really may not be leaning that's occurring, and this goes beyond the intent or purpose of the flexible ramping test. So in this scenario, it's believed that the EIM entity should still be able to participate in the EIM. We agreed, and as a result are proposing a 1% tolerance band. It will technically be 1% or 1 megawatt, whichever is greater. So if the ramping capability for one of the 4 tests, because we'll now be doing the test for each 4 intervals and failing for the corresponding interval, if the requirement is met within the tolerance band, we will no longer be limiting transfers. And we do remind stakeholders that the 1% tolerance band was chosen because this aligns with the balancing test to determine if the over and under scheduling penalty applies. We also can implement this enhancement through our business practice manual change process. Does not require any tariff changes, and this will be implemented by the end of 2018 as well. Are there any questions on the introduction of the 1% tolerance band?
We have 2 questions in the queue. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hi, Lindsay Schluckaway from NV Energy. First, I just wanted to state that we were very appreciative of the tolerance band being implemented, but we were wondering if there was any way, I guess, for a little bit of a larger tolerance band, because 1% is extremely small for an uncertainty amount. And I guess one of the possible proposals we were sort of thinking about is if there was a way to measure the actual uncertainty that was occurring and then using maybe that for the tolerance band.
So I don't know how I would know that information before the market to do that, some approach like that.
Well, you would have to do it after the fact. I guess what I was thinking is doing it seasonally or something.
I think we'd have to take that discussion offline to understand what you're proposing there. I think that the 1%, it is something that's configurable. I think that we should introduce the 1% that we have now, because it is consistent with what we have for the current balancing test, and then continue to monitor to see how it works. But I am a little concerned that this sort of becomes a death spiral where, well, I don't want 1, I want 5%, then I want 10%, then I want 25%, and we've sort of moved way away from the actual requirement. The intent of the 1% is really to go after those sort of rounding errors, so that we're not failing people for a rounding error. But it's not to reduce the overall requirement of the amount of ramping capability you need.
No, and yeah, I agree with you. I guess that's why I was, seeing if there was a method that we could maybe use historical data on the accuracy of the actual uncertainty calculation and then apply that amount to the tolerance band. It was just a suggestion. And then I had another question on the 15 minutes, the last slide or the last proposal that you guys are going to move forward with, the 15-minute freezing. I was wondering if at all that will be delayed or pushed back with the recent market notice that went out about the day ahead 15-minute, I guess, issues that were realized with performance. Is this also going to be tacked on to that, or will this still move forward with this time?
They're completely unrelated.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Lindsay, the next slide actually is addressing the items that are included in the DAME proposal. So we do have 2 items that are included in the DAME proposal related to the balance test and the capacity test, but the flex ramp test improvements are independent and can be, actually one of the big takeaways from this is typically it takes a long time to get these improvements through a stakeholder process, through a tariff approval by our board and filed with FERC, but we're actually very thrilled that we can get these improvements implemented through the BPM change process because that can occur quickly. So that's a big takeaway from this approach.
We do have one question. So Kyle, we'll move on to the next question.
Moving to our next question. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
This is Justin Wolf from Pacific Corp. I won't take up a lot of your time because you said you'll be open to changing the methodology on this. But one of the issues that I have about the 1% threshold is currently it seems that the flex ramp requirement is not an absolute value, meaning it's not always a positive number. And it seems that this 1% wouldn't be applied fairly during the whole ban. So I was kind of wondering if you're doing some changes in the future to the requirements, if for some reason that these requirements will be positive, and be an absolute value in the future, which might resolve this issue.
So are you saying that you've seen instances where your up requirement is negative?
Absolutely, all the time. And the down requirement, I've seen negative on both of them, and having a negative capacity and a negative requirement. And I don't know, and I don't understand this methodology with the 1% tolerance, because if anything's less than 100 megawatts, it'll be 1 megawatt, even though we have a negative requirement and a negative capacity. I don't know if there's an error in the calculation, and that needs to be addressed. I don't know if any other entities.
So again, I think when we do the business practice manual process on this, there is a comment period on that. I will take that back, but again, you can also bring that up in your comments to the BPM process. But the intent of this is that you would always have a positive requirement in the up direction, a positive requirement in the down direction. And then basically, as long as you're within 1% of that number or 1 megawatt, you're okay.
Okay. Well, that's not the case, and I'll probably take that up with a city ticket and see if there's another issue with that.
Yeah, that's another approach, too.
Okay. Thank you.
And moving to our last question. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hey, this is Akai with Seattle City Light. First of all, I want to start off by saying thank you very much for the publication of the white paper and having this call and making space for the discussion about this proposal. I think it's really important that, the EIM entities and CAISO have this discussion about proposed solutions, and that we have the feedback and the dialogue about where this is going. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about timelines. I know that we have a lot of initiatives that are being proposed for completion in the coming months, and CAISO has a really ambitious timeline for getting a lot of things done, and I really appreciate that because it's important and there's a lot of changes that need to be made, but at the same time we know that that often comes along with things slipping behind schedule. And the business practice, manual change process isn't as easy to follow and to engage in these types of discussions on. And I'm wondering, since you're hoping to get everything, these two items that are going to be business practice changes done by the end of 2018. I'm wondering if we might be able to revisit another resource sufficiency white paper in January 2018 or January 2019 that describes kind of the progress that's been made, if any additional analysis has been done and if any additional issues have come up, that kind of gives us a check-in for, okay, where have things gone in the couple of months when we were supposed to have seen, some of these improvements implemented.
So we do not plan to publish another white paper. The purpose of this white paper is to do exactly what you highlighted, that we would identify where and when each of these items would be resolved and give you the current timelines for that. I do agree that that things can change, and when we make changes to those from an implementation timing standpoint, we do communicate that through our market performance and planning forum, and so we would continue to do that. So in this document, in terms of the timings that we've committed in terms of when certain items will be implemented, you've got the best information that we're going to have there. And for these items that have especially these first two items where we know we're already in the process of working with our vendors to develop this functionality, we're going forward with that, and we'll have the BPM process just like we do with any software release.
And I guess that it would be great if we could just have some more transparency, because I think that, the start with, publishing this white paper and having this call is that, a great example for the way that we can have dialogues that are deeper and more engaged than those that are allowed in the BPM process. So,
again, I would highlight that the BPM process does has a comment process, just like a regular stakeholder initiative does, and we engage in those, I know from a policy standpoint, as needed, even though it's primarily driven by operations and technology. But, I can speak from personal experience. I've spent a lot of time working on BPM-related items when we need to. So, again, I think that that's a robust process once we've made the determination that we're going to implement something.
There is one more question in the queue. Caller, your line has been unmuted. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
I think I'm now unmuted. This is Aaron Red Horse. Yeah, so I wanted to express support for Seattle Citylight's previous comments. I think the one concern that I think was a theme and the general comments on coming out of these workshops was, and where I think we're only at item 2, but we have many different items that are summarized in this white paper, and the ability to come in January or some point in 2019 to look at that kind of collectively again would be quite valuable. It's not clear to me if things are, delayed or things are delayed in these different small streams of work, how we then collectively look at it again. And that, I think, would be valuable to be able to look at.
So I would highlight that we have an existing process, the Market Performance and Planning Forums, where we come in and give updates on both the implementation timelines as well as the policy development timelines. So through that process, to the extent that, for instance, some of these other items where we've identified a specific initiative that's addressing it, if that initiative schedule is changed or something, we communicate that through that process. If the ask is, can we highlight, that there was some, one of the items out of this was in that, when we were giving updates on that, I'm sure we can take that back and do that. So I would just really highlight that there's an existing process that actually does what I think everyone's asking for.
And Don, that would be then the Market Performance Planning Forum, where you believe these would flow through.
Yep. Yeah. And those are quarterly.
Okay.
Or no, I'm sorry.
They're every 2 months.
They're every other month. Every 2 months.
And there are no more questions in the queue.
Okay. All right, we'll keep moving forward on to slide number 5. So these two items, improvements to the balancing and capacity test to implement 15-minute granularity do require tariff changes and therefore align with our day-ahead market enhancements initiative. So these have been documented in the recently posted second revised straw proposal, which explains that the balance test will be performed for each 15-minute interval, and the corresponding over-under scheduling penalty will be applied to that 15-minute interval. The capacity test will also be performed for each 15-minute interval, and failure will result in EIM transfers being limited to the previous 15-minute interval. Since these do require tariff changes, they require approval by the EIM governing body and ISO Board of Governors, and therefore align with the Day-Ahead Market Enhancements Phase 1 initiative, which is scheduled for the implementation in the fall of 2020.
And I'll just add on, since Lindsay brought up the market notice that came out. So again, in terms of developing the draft final proposal, we basically have it. There weren't a lot of changes required between the second revised straw proposal and the draft final proposal, especially after we introduced 15-minute granularity for bidding. So it really is more of just dotting I's, crossing T's, and making sure that we've identified everything that's hourly that needs to move to 15-minute. So in terms of a policy development standpoint, we're pretty much locked and loaded and ready to go. The reason why we wanted to take additional time is that we've been looking at the performance of moving to 15-minute granularity, and we hadn't got it to a point to where we wanted to put out the draft final proposal. In the event that as we spend the next quarter fine-tuning that, we may need to make some clarifications through the policy development process, and so that's why we wanted to keep it open. But that doesn't change the implementation date or any of the other planned implementation date or any of the other elements within the roadmap that we posted last week.
Kyle, do we have any questions?
There are no questions in the queue.
All right, slide number 6. The use of a new approach to calculate the requirement that's used in the flexible ramping test can also be implemented with a BPM change. Stakeholders have suggested that the requirement is calculated based on varying levels of forecasted load, wind, and solar. We currently use the histogram approach, and it's been brought up that a histogram is not always representative of what's occurring in that specific particular trade date or interval. We agree, and we are in the process of investigating alternate approaches. One of these approaches was documented in the Day-Ahead Market Enhancements paper earlier this summer, and that approach uses regression testing based on varying levels of load, wind, and solar. We have done analysis to date to determine that the requirement for the flexible ramping product that would be calculated across the day-ahead market to 15-minute market does see improvements, and we are in the process of completing simulations to that same analysis from the 15-minute market to the 5-minute market. I will also note that we are investigating other approaches as well. So we do agree that there are improvements that can be made to determine or calculate the flex ramp requirement. We're investigating those and completing simulation for those right now. We have done work to determine that a tariff change is not specifically required for the calculation of the requirements, and therefore this can be implemented through the BPM change process. However, we have to know the implementation date before starting the BPM change process because we have not specified or determined which approach we'll be using. The implementation date is not yet known. So as we continue to do simulation and development, this will continue to evolve. I will also note that the historical calculation of undelivered intertie resources, which is based on a histogram, will not be changed. So we will still use the histogram to determine the amount of undelivered intertie resources. What we are planning on changing is the requirement calculation and getting rid of the histogram for that approach. Are there any questions on this topic?
I just want to add one other point too. So on items like changing the forecast, the requirement calculation methodology, these are usually, since they can, you want to have a broader discussion of them. These are actually also discussed in the Market Performance Planning Forum as special topics, and you would be able to see, so this is like a perfect example where, given that we're investigating alternative approaches, we would have a technical discussion in that Market Performance and Planning Forum about these sort of changes to provide additional information to stakeholders in addition to the BPM change process.
Kyle, do we have any questions?
One question did come in. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hi, Lindsay Flickway with NV Energy. Don, you've mentioned the MPP forum, and I guess I've never seen a slide on there to show the implementation for any BPM proposals or anything in the BPM process. So I was wondering if there was a way that maybe we could get one slide in there on the flex ramp items of what will be implemented and like the dates, the projected dates of when they will be implemented and when they actually go in so that we can follow it. Would that be possible?
So Lindsay, the way to look at it is once we have an implementation project, which we do for the first two items, we would then be tracking that as part of our implementation activities as a project. Whenever there is a project, there will be corresponding BPM changes that are made through the BPM change process. So we will have a specific project associated with implementation activities that we would track through the Market Performance and Planning Forum.
Okay, so then this would be similar to the slides, I mean, because they basically go over those RUG slides. Would that also be in those RUG meetings?
I would believe if that's probably another level of detail where they would provide updates there as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So again, anything that's going to be implemented will be a project. Anything.
All right, I'll look for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Kyle, any other questions?
Yes, we have two more in the queue. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hello, this is Mariano from BPA again. Just wanted to know if there are any thoughts on when the simulation study might be completed or published on the new approach to calculating the flex ramp requirement.
I don't have a date for that yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Moving to our last question. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hey, this is Yerke in Seattle again. So I wanted to understand a little bit more about what types of presentations we could expect in the Market Performance and Planning Forum around these different methodologies. You mentioned that you were looking at several different methodologies for calculating the flex ramp requirement. Could we expect to see the analysis of kind of the trade-offs between those methodologies and an opportunity for comment and discussion about which would be the appropriate methodology to select moving forward? That really sounds like an important discussion that should happen in a transparent forum rather than just moving straight forward with a BPM.
No, I think, as I said, I think you would have discussion of this before moving straight forward to the BPM. It may not be in a policy development initiative. We may leverage the existing Market Performance and Planning Forum, but we also do have instances where we have put out technical briefings and discuss those openly as well. So you wouldn't go straight to that. My point here is you wouldn't go straight to BPM without discussing the approaches in more detail, especially for a design changes such as this.
Gotcha, with an opportunity for comment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Kyle?
One did come in. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hey, Don, this is Callie with WTF, and actually, I won't echo the last commenter's point, but, we agree that a lot of times BPM just going straight to DPM change process, not everyone monitors those as frequently as they do others. So just as long as when you guys start making these changes, it's very transparent and communications are out there so that the appropriate people and entities can be monitoring this, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
Thanks, Callie. Any other questions, Kyle?
There are no more questions in the queue.
Okay.
Right, we are on to slide number 7. The CAISO is addressing undelivered intertie resources in the new intertie deviation settlement. During the workshops, it was brought up, stakeholders raised concerns that the ISO in particular is counting undelivered imports towards the resource efficiency evaluation. The claim is that the test begins, and at that time, the CAISO is making assumptions on what intertie resources will be tagged or not, and if the tag doesn't materialize, then we've counted those imports when in fact the import energy is not actually being delivered. This problem is specific to hourly blocked intertie resources in the CAISO. 15-minute resources that do not have a tag and a transmission profile sent before the resource efficiency evaluation are not counted towards the test. That resource would not then receive an award. And we do agree that the undelivery of hourly block resources is a problem. So that's why we have this new initiative. It's the Intertie Deviation Settlement Initiative to address that. There was a suggestion that the CAISO should implement bid source verification for intertie resources, and we are declining to do that. This standard imposed on the CAISO would be a greater standard than the other EIM entities are held to. Additionally, in the EIM Year 1 Phase 2 initiative, we clarified that e-tags that are approved, basically an e-tag can also be pending when we're determining the submission of base schedules, and those are used in the resource efficiency evaluation. I also will note that bid verification to determine a source generator is really outside of the scope of the CAISO's responsibility. I do believe that it's our responsibility to ensure that the energy that we award is delivered and that our markets and incentives encourage delivery of awarded energy on the interties. But in reality, it does not matter what specific generator that energy is from, and we are addressing and implementing some new market designs in the IDS initiative. I'll actually be posting a straw proposal which will outline some of those market design proposals. That paper will be going out. It's a straw proposal, and it will be published on October 8th, and we're holding an in-person stakeholder meeting on October 15th to discuss that. We also have a new initiative, the RA Enhancements initiative, and this will address specifically the delivery of resource adequacy and address resource adequacy delivery on the interties. And we'll be proposing new rules such as potentially tying a physical generator for an RA resource and ensuring that transmission is associated with that RA resource if it's awarded. So that's the improvements we're planning on making. If you have an interest in this, please participate in the Intertie Deviation Settlement Straw Proposal meeting as well as the RA initiative. Any questions on this?
Yes, we have a question in the queue. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hi, good afternoon. It's Mark Pullman with PowerX.
Mark.
Hi, just a couple questions and comments. I guess appreciate that you're planning on addressing some of the related issues in both the RA enhancements and IDS initiative in the comments you made on this slide. I guess the first point or question I would make is that when you say ISO hourly block resources, the problem is specific to all hourly block resources. So that's not just in the Haas market. That's everything that cleared the IFM as well, the day-ahead market. It's all hourly block resources. Is that your understanding?
I agree with you. That is my understanding, and the new market design that I'll be putting out next week will address all of them.
And I appreciate that, and I don't think we're that concerned which initiative it gets addressed under, but I do think it's important to clarify that the situation is different for the CAISO BAA than EIM entities. The CAISO BAA is the only one with intertie bidding. EIM entities have bilateral transactions and they have remote resources where they own the resource or they own the output. And so the situation is really quite unique to the CAISO BAA. I think the part that we struggle with the most is that in your market, you have marketers who are submitting energy offers into the day-ahead market, into the HAS process. It's not about whether they've identified the generator. They don't have any generation. They're just offering energy to the CAISO market in the day-ahead or in the HASP after they get an award and after you've included their offers to help the CAISO BAA pass the RS test, then they may be out there looking to buy it. I think that's very different than EIM entities who may not have tagged supply, let's say from a wind farm that they own because they're waiting for a final number, or they have a tag pending. So I don't think we should be comparing the two situations. We acknowledge the CAISO is unique. They have inter-tie bidding. I think the part we struggle with, both whether it's an RA resource or a non-RA resource, is supply from marketers where they really don't have anything at all, and those offers are counting towards passing the RS test for the CAISO BAA, and we really think that issue really needs to be addressed.
So Mark, I think it's important to point out that we run that resource efficiency evaluation 3 times. The one that matters is the one performed at T-40, which determines whether or not you're going to be frozen for the hour or failed. The other ones are advisory and give them information to, if you're failed, maybe you can take some actions between those time periods before the final test at T-40. So I think including the marketers in the HASP run doesn't seem to be problematic. But if you did include them in the final one where the determination of pass-fail is binding, that's where you need to look, and I think the proposals that Megan's working on are addressing that.
And I think that's what we're looking to, Don, because just to put it quite clearly, marketers submit energy into the market, which we're not opposed to. You know, we're supportive of all participants being able to participate in the market. But if a marketer puts, you know, if there's substantial energy offers that aren't tagged at the binding interval at T-40, and they're really just speculative supply, and then the CAISO passes and it doesn't show up, then you end up with potentially EIM transfers from the rest of us, and in effect, we're backstopping the capacity that they don't have. And that is not something that we think should be sustained.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I definitely am hearing you and see your point, and I think the new proposal we're coming out with is the idea is we want our market to be making conclusions and awarding based on what is going to be delivered, and what is counting towards the resource efficiency test should reflect that as well. And I think the inter-tie deviation settlement is addressing all of your points.
So that's great. We appreciate that. We look forward to seeing the paper out on the initiative. Thank you.
Kyle, any other questions?
Yes, we have one more in the queue. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Ramon Mitchell from Pacific Corp here. In section 3.5 of the white paper and footnote 3, there's some mention to the fact that the historical inter-tie T4 to T20 deviations are applied as an incremental requirement to both the capacity test and to the flexible ramping test. However, it was my understanding that it was only applied to the capacity test. Am I right, or is the paper right?
It is applied to, again, it's applied to the capacity test, and it increases the amount. It basically increases your 15-minute targets you need to be able to hit. So it affects both the ramp test and the capacity test. Think of it as you just increase the 15-minute value that you need to be able to hit.
The incremental requirement based on the histogram for T40.
Inter-tie deviation.
Inter-tie deviation, yes. Increases the requirement of the flexible ramping test.
So it increases the amount of capacity you need to have, and it changes the 15-minute targets that you need to be able to hit from your ramping test standpoint. So it affects both.
Okay, I may have to go back and read the business practice manual in that case, but thank you for your answer.
Anyone else in the queue, Kyle?
Yes, one just came into the queue. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Donna, it's Marco with Power. I'm wondering if you could just go back and check and clarify participants, because there's two things that were said today that our experience is just different. One is whether all entities are exposed to the capacity test and having to pass or fail it. That's not our experience. And the second one is the historic failures. We don't believe that's in both the capacity and the flexible ramping sufficiency test. And we don't have
I'll check.
If you could check on both those, because our experience differs from your statements on those two areas. And like I said, it'd just be great if you go back and check. We can go back and check on our side, but there's some discrepancy there and we don't know why.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Kyle?
There are no more questions in the queue.
Okay.
Slide 8, the ISO is providing additional metrics regarding the resource efficiency evaluation in the Market Performance Planning Forum. This is in order to improve transparency. Per stakeholder request, we've already published data related to the frequency of resource efficiency evaluation failures by each EIM entity. This was published in the August 29th MPPF slide deck. We are also planning on developing additional metrics, and we'll be publishing these during the MPPF on December 11th of this year. Next, actually, I should ask, are there any questions on that?
There are no questions in the queue.
Great. This next one is a follow-up of the discussion we held at the July 19th workshop discussing the use of what supply counts towards the resource efficiency evaluation. We'd like to make our stance clear that the ISO will not and does not plan to ever permit the use of available balancing capacity in the resource evaluation. We remind stakeholders that the purpose of ABC is to individually resolve infeasibilities for each EIM BAA on its own. Flexible ramping product, on the other hand, is used to address uncertainty across the entire EIM footprint. The topic, I will also note, of available balancing capacity was discussed during a FERC proceeding, and as a result of that FERC proceeding, the ISO tariff explicitly states that ABC will not count towards the resource efficiency evaluation. Don, do you want to add on anything on that? So we are not going to be counting ABC towards the resource efficiency evaluation. Any comments on that?
There are no questions in the queue.
Finally, this is our last item before we recap today. There was a request from stakeholders for a holistic review of the resource sufficiency evaluation, and we remind stakeholders that this will occur with the extending of the day-ahead market to the EIM, the EDM initiative. The EDM initiative will require a day-ahead resource efficiency evaluation, and by implementing a day-ahead resource efficiency evaluation, we will have to align that with the real-time resource efficiency evaluation, and will complete a holistic review at that time. The EVM stakeholder process is scheduled to begin the middle of next year, that's 2019, and we'll open up for discussion during that stakeholder initiative.
Any questions, Kyle?
There are no questions in the queue.
To wrap up for today, we have appreciated stakeholder engagement to develop these enhancements. I think this is a good example of how we can use workshops and come up with solutions that are amenable to all parties involved. So as a recap, the 15-minute freezing and the introduction of a tolerance band for the flexible ramping test will be implemented through the BPM change process and implemented by the end of 2018. Through the BPM change process, stakeholders will have the opportunity to see additional implementation details as well as provide a written comment. So please follow the BPM change process for those two enhancements. We have additional improvements that will be presented to stakeholders in separate initiatives, such as the Day Ahead Market Enhancements Initiative, the Intertie Deviation Settlement Initiative, and the RA Enhancements Initiative. We will also be publishing additional metrics and data in the NPPF in December, and we will be completing a holistic review during the EVAM initiative. So with that, if there's any outstanding questions on the white paper, we'd like to take those now.
We do have 2 in the queue. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Yes, this is Mariana from BPA. Quick question. So in moving to a 15-minute evaluation, will there be any changes to how the diversity benefit is calculated or any changes to the feasibility test?
So there would be no changes to the feasibility test. The feasibility test is whether or not you have congestion embedded in your base schedules. That would then be resolved in the real-time market. So there's no changes to that. With regards to the flexible ramping requirement, we are not proposing any changes to how that's calculated today, where it's an hourly value applied in each 15-minute interval.
Okay, thank you.
Moving to our last question. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hey, this is Yoki from Seattle again. I just wanted to take the opportunity to, again, thank you for, publishing the white paper and putting together this presentation and all your work on these issues. It's really important to EIM entities and future EIM entities that we get these RF tests right, and making these improvements will hopefully be a positive step in that direction. So again, thank you very much. And then the last comment I want to make is that, it sounds like we're going to be doing some follow-up in the market performance and planning forum. We're probably going to have another 1 or 2 of those between now and January 2019, where we're hoping to have these the BPMs implemented in a couple of different areas. And so maybe in the market performance and planning forum might be a good time to have an update on how those BPM processes are going, if they're, completed, or if we anticipate having any delays or something like that. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Any other questions?
There are no more questions in the queue.
Okay, great. Well, as mentioned earlier, we're not taking written comments, but if you do have any follow-up questions, you're welcome to submit those to the initiative comments at kaiso.com mailbox. And these materials are out on the miscellaneous stakeholders meetings webpage if you're looking for them, as well as the materials related to the EIM offer rules workshops held earlier this year. So thank you for joining us. Appreciate your help, Kyle, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you for joining today's conference. The session has now concluded, and you may disconnect.